Windows back at the front. So it's the way Windows is. I've got a lot of problems like that. I've got DOS 6. DOS 6. I've got my tape streaming to work with DOS 6. It won't copy data back. It's totally messed
Thank you. I see on a very kind plenty of four-way transfer simulation. That's the physics for the heavy duty development system. Yes, no, I can see that.
It's not a dipstick, it's a thermometer.
I can see if you, as long as you take the, put the track on the feedback, you can regulate it very accurately. Because one of the difficulties is one of the properties of the
That's one of the interesting pieces of technology.
I mean, if you were relying on the motor data,
That's presumably there to make sure it's at the right operating temperature.
Yeah, I guess you didn't use it until the temperature was right.
So it's not exactly an automatic feedback system.
It's the container which amuses me. Sort of undoubtedly an afterthought, but carefully carefully manufactured. There are no trustees in the Science Museum, I think.
How many crates do you need? I think they're on the door behind you.
these are slightly offset. There's 32 tracks in one dimension.
I think there's a problem that this is the 402 project and the 401 computer. The addressing
So that's pocket address. So that's about a fifth of an inch per track. 32 tracks, 1.5 inches. Fantastic. It's kind of a difference to see that as well.
Leave the seat to the front of the elderly and infirm, please.
Can I welcome you to this 401 resurrection party? We have a really singular event.
I lived at the end of
in 1953, there was the coronation, there was the ascent of Everest, and there was the first performance of the 401. And history will tell us, in course, which was the most significant of those events. We had hoped to welcome Professor John Coles, who was director of Elliott Brothers Research Labs at the time, 40 years ago, but unfortunately he can't be with us. We're still hoping to welcome this evening Lady Bagrid, wife of Cillian Bagrid, chairman of Elliott's at the time, and also Lord Halsbury, who was chairman of the NRDC at the time, and also, incidentally, as you'll have seen on the boards outside, the chairman of the Science Museum's Advisory Committee for some 14 years in the 1950s and 1960s. Now, the beginnings of this project, you've had an opportunity to see outside. It's a conservation program which we're carrying out in the museum with our own conservation staff to the sorts of conservation standards that we would expect a museum to follow. Having said that, we hardly know what those standards are, because although it's possible to apply conventional conservation wisdom as it has developed in museums, and this museum and many other museums over many years, when it comes to this sort of project, it's very much a question of relying upon you and many people like you to be able to provide the help and knowledge and expertise which enables us to do the right sort of job. And that is what we hope we're going to be able to do. The evening is to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the first public running of the Elliott 401 computer. We have Professor William Elliott here this evening, and as I said, I hope we will have two others, Lady Bagrick or Halsbury, joining us later on to join in this celebration. Conservation work is being done by museum staff under Suzanne Keane, the restoration work by the Computer Conservation Society members with Tony Sale over here as the project leader. And this CCS working party is led by Chris Burton, ably assisted by many of the people who designed, built, maintained and programmed the 401. The program builds on the already fruitful cooperation between the Science Museum and the British Computer Society and establishes, I hope, the Science Museum and the Computer Conservation Society, I know, as world leaders in computer conservation and restoration. As you know, we have outstanding holdings in this field. Doran Swade, the curator of these collections, is an assiduous acquirer of new objects to swell our collections and to fill the gaps, filling in the continuity from Babbage and before down to today. So to have the 401 is itself an important part of us and our programs, but to be able to have that 401 properly restored and conserved and in working order, all the more important perhaps, is a major achievement for us as a museum, and is a very great tribute to you as its designers, builders, programmers and users. So with those words, can I again welcome you, and on behalf of the Science Museum, thank you for everything that you've done to help us start the job and carry out the work which you see in progress, or some examples of which you see in progress outside. We are really tremendously pleased with the way in which the Computer Conservation Society is interacting with the Science Museum, because it would, I think, be quite impossible for us to do what we are doing without the sort of help and support that you're able to afford us. So whatever it is you can communicate, or whether it's about writing it down or putting it onto tape or turning up in the sheds at the back in the evenings to convey something of your knowledge and expertise, we will regard that very much, not only as direct assistance, but as part of the valuable archive of this and of the other machines that we have in our collection. Finally, an exhibit, because with the Elliott 401 came a plaque. And on it said a computer is only as good as the people around it, which is really to say what I've just said. This machine, the Elliott NRDC 401, owes much of its success and long working life to Douglas Rees of the Department of Statistics, Rothamsted Experimental Station, in whose charge it was from March 1954 to July 1965, its first curator, if you like. So that is just another little bit of its history, and will, when the Elliott 401 goes on display and is demonstrated from time to time, be part of its visible archive. So again, welcome to the Science Museum, and thank you on behalf of the Science Museum for everything that you have done, and we hope will continue to do, to make this conservation program such a success. Thank you. Am I going to introduce you? No, I'm not. You need no introduction.
I need no introduction. Thank you, Dr. Cotton. We're marking the 40th anniversary of the debut of the 401, a pilot model machine built in local workshops at Elliott Brothers Research Laboratories, Boreham Wood, in the year 1952-53, to prove new technologies, including standard plug-in circuit units, to circuitry, due to the late Charles Owen, who went on to Ferranti and later to IBM. The 401 was designed and built by Andrew St. Johnston and Lawrence Clark, who are here, and was on show for a week, or somewhat under a week, in April 1953 at the Physical Society exhibition, down here somewhere, two floors down, I believe, and worked reliably during that week. In the following year, it was housed in the Cambridge University Mathematical Laboratory. There it suffered frequent intermittent faults during the test period. Harry Carpenter was with it, and he and the team at Elliott Brothers at Borehamwood got these problems under control. Many diagnostic programs were written and run, and it turned out that the infrequent faults were due to premature aging of the 1287 double triodes. And this was tackled by, it was due to internal chemistry, about a build-up of barium orthosilicate in the valves. Preventative or provocative maintenance dealt with that one. They were dealt with by routine running and refurbishment of the magnetic disc that accounted for the other problems. When that was done, the queue of users which it used to have at the beginning formed again, and the last 6 weeks of the 401 at Cambridge did sterling work to the joy of Dr. J.C. Miller, the number theorist. Harry Carpenter writes, priority was given to a number theory problem for Dr. J.C. Miller of Mazaban, who alone had not lost faith in the machine during this trial, during the troubles. The problem was an obscure problem of prime numbers called the Haupt exponent, and Donald Guinness wrote a very efficient program for it. The machine, the 401, would sit all day considering the program. At an increasing time interval, the typewriter would clatter, and a new, even bigger prime number, which satisfied the criteria, would be typed out. The rattle of the typewriter produced Dr. Miller running from his office to inspect a new prime. While I don't understand the problem, my memory is that in the first weeks of reliable running, 401 confirmed several years of manual work by Dr. Miller. In the ensuing weeks, it more than doubled the number of Haupt exponents to calculate the life work of a correspondent. Sorry, Dr. Miller had a correspondent in the west coast of America, and in the 1 or 2 weeks, 401 produced all of his life's work. And Dr. Miller was wondering how to break this to his correspondent. In May last year, a seminar was organized by the Computer Conservation Society on the 401 and the machines which followed, the Elliott 401 family and the Ferranti Pegasus. Lord Halsbury, as managing director of NRDC, through the 1950s, made the most valiant effort working within difficult terms of reference to persuade electronics and punch card firms to collaborate in producing a powerful business computer, an effort which he later described as 10 years of pushing mules uphill. John Crawley at our seminar gave a graphic account of this struggle. John's story is an alternative narrative to the central and not entirely accurate chapters in John Hendry's book, Innovating for Failure, which deals with NRDC and the split in computer development between Elliott Brothers and Ferranti. As concerns the 401, Lord Halsbury and his colleagues interacted with 2 very key players. John Coles, Director of Research at Royal Elliott Brothers, and Leon Badrick, Managing Director of Elliott Brothers. NRDC were much impressed with both of these gentlemen, with the team developing the 401 under them, and with the strong support which Leon Badrick was giving to the project. After a great deal of internal manoeuvring, NRDC obtained approval in 1952 to place a £30,000 contract for the 401 development with Elliott Brothers. The great wisdom of this step was entirely due to Lord Halsbury and his colleagues, and credit is due to them. When the machine was demonstrated here, it showed the very great wisdom of that step. From the maths lab, the 401 found a home at Rothamsted, which Gavin Ross, the present librarian who worked on it at the time, will tell you about. It was retired at the Science Museum in 1965, playing its own funeral march at the retirement ceremony. Yeah.
Well, thank you for inviting me to tell you about how life was like with the 11 years in which we ran 401, although John Gower, who is here, was there for a much longer of that period and can probably fill in on some of the details. I was only here for the last 4 years of its running life because I was actually appointed to program the new Ferranti Orion, which didn't actually arrive until 1963. Now, Rothamsted is the premier and oldest agricultural research station in the world. We're just celebrating its 150th anniversary this year, so it's a year of anniversaries. And it's also the birthplace of modern mathematical statistics, where R.A. Fisher arrived in 1919, was shocked at the absence of computing facilities and demanded a machine called the Millionaire, which cost £200, which was more than his salary. And his successor, Frank Yates, then appreciating the need for more sophisticated computing equipment, in 1954 heard of the existence of this 401, which was by then sitting idle in Cambridge, and as he couldn't afford to buy a new computer, the NRDC came to an arrangement with Rothamsted, and it very fortunately came to us and had 11 years of very happy life, analysing vast numbers of experiments, surveys, new mathematical ideas, and in fact Frank Yates was the second president of the British Computer Society. The British Computer Society was fairly small in those days and consisted mainly of a few enthusiasts centred around places like Rothamsted actually had computers. So I worked with John Gower, Howard Simpson, who I hope might be here tonight, Michael Healy, and Frank Yates himself, who was of course 91 next month and has decided he was a little frail to come this evening, but is still in very good form, and we're sorry not to see him tonight. This team programmed all the statistical analyses that were required for the Agricultural Research Service at the time, but since we were the only computer around doing non-mathematical work, many requests came in for different types of analysis, and we got into multivariate analysis, cluster analysis through John Gower, and we analysed experiments and surveys for third world countries, for the Colonial Office, and various other institutions that didn't have computers. And so for a time we were a great hub of that activity, doing work for all kinds of people. The actual programming, some of you may remember, was a very intricate job, filling in little squares on a chart, telling you where to put the next order, making sure that the multiplications were always 31 instructions apart, trying to get the timing right so that it didn't waste too much time waiting for the drum to come round, wondering what to do about the double length multiplication and these funny gap digits that got lost and reappeared, learning all kinds of techniques. One of the most intricate programs was the one that used the B modification technique, which could actually alter orders just before they were carried out, and this program was required to eliminate itself so that the whole of the drum was clear or had some recognizable pattern in it. If you actually wanted to annotate your output with any alphabetical characters, it was a very elaborate procedure. You had to spot an order which happened to have a binary last 5 digits, which happened to be a letter of the alphabet, and then you could ask for that to be printed. So we didn't do very much alphanumeric work. It was nearly all just tables of numbers that you had to annotate by hand. And of course the programs were kept in a cupboard. They were just rolls of tape, and the operators had to decide which program to run, and that might take 5 or 10 minutes to load the program, so that obviously we stacked up all the jobs in one program, and people kept on pestering us to run their job, and we said, well, it's not worth running your job until several other people have the same problem. And so it was done rather in that kind of way. And we did shift works into the evening, sometimes running quite late at night. As reminded by this in a novel by Fred Hoyle, the astronomer, who wrote a novel called The Black Cloud, in which a computer scientist of the 1950s vintage saves the world by running the EDSAC 401, beating the clock and solving the problem by about 4 o'clock in the morning to prevent the universe from destruction. It wasn't quite like us with us, but we did do quite a lot of night work, and some of the operations was so leisurely that you could set the machine, look at the results, decide to go down for a drink at the pub, and come back and see whether it was beginning to converge or not, and then you would flick the hand switches and something magic would happen, and it would complete the job. Program errors were, there was a lot of use of the hand punch to correct little mistakes in the tape, and the old coloured sellotape that was so invaluable in this process. And then there was, of course, always the engineers. Doug Rees in particular was always at the back of the machine, adding new bits. We had a very singular card reader that was fixed up to the hand switches, and it clanked away, and it could do actually 12 cards a minute when it was really going full pace, so that it could only read 32 columns out of these 80 columns, so that you had to sort of reproduce your cards, read the other columns. But we had a card reader as well, and gradually the world overtook us, and other people started to get slightly faster machines. Fred Hoyle had to go to California to run his stuff on a 7090 because the EDSAC was a little slow, and our friends no longer needed us to run their jobs, only to show us how they did it. But we cut our computing teeth on the 401, gathering our individual routines into suites and systems, writing primitive autocodes, learning power and limitation of various numerical methods, devising ways of handling multi-way arrays and hierarchical structures. And this experience has carried through the generations of successor machines. Nowadays one has to use primitive programs like Fortran, and you can't do these nice things like cyclic shifts and logical not equivalences very easily. Speeding up a program really meant something in those days. So I'm very happy to see interest in the machine revived, and wish the 401 a long and happy retirement.
Thank you very much. Just a few words about the actual project that we've got running here. Like other people of my age, I only manage the project, other people do the work, and we're very pleased to have Chris Burton, who's taken over the chairmanship of the 401 Working Party, and he has really put in an enormous amount of work on getting this project up and running, and it's greatly to thanks to him, ably assisted by the elders who have come along to give us their knowledge so gratefully received. It's an interesting exercise, this one, because in more cases than most, in more cases than most, in this case, a lot of the information about the machine is not written down, and we've actually had to put together a lot of information which was in various people's heads, and it was very scanty, and so it's been an exercise in information gathering and collating as much as trying to get the hardware to work itself together. And on the hardware side, with Pegasus we were quite lucky in that it had only been in store for about 18 months, and therefore with some impunity we could just take it out of store, stick it back together again and switch it on. When I first looked at the 401 2.5 years ago, I thought perhaps that's what we might be able to do with that, but Suzanne Keane came along and slapped my wrist and said, no, it's got to be conserved, and she was absolutely right. And so the result has been that it's put back the project of getting it together, but I'm now quite certain in my own mind that when we do get it together, it really is going to work, because the Conservation Department, Helen Kingsley, Mickey Box and others who are here, have done an absolutely marvellous job, as you can see on the pieces out there, in actually conserving the computer before we start to reassemble it and restore it. And that is obviously the right way to do these things. Although as an engineer I figured there's something wrong with that, just stuck the bolts on to see what happens. I bow to my letters on museum culture. But no, we're very pleased to work with this. We've all got a tremendous amount of feeling for the 401, and I think particularly the way that, as I say, the elders who designed and built the machine have given so generously of their knowledge and time in helping us to do this. A major achievement for the Conservation Society and the Science Museum. Thank you very much.
Can I, as the current president of the British Computer Society, just say a few words? First of all, can I thank the Science Museum once again for providing an opportunity such as this for us to meet under the auspices of the Computer Conservation Society. Perhaps I can just say one thing to you. It's something I think the Society feels very strongly at the present time, and it does relate very much to our commitment to working with the museum to restore machines and to make them into exhibits that the public can come and see. There have been, I hardly need to say, rather more bad publicity recently, the London Ambulance System, Taurus and so on, about computer systems. I'm sure 30 or 40 years ago those sort of things never happened, or perhaps if they did, they weren't in the press. I was a little too young, I'm afraid, to really know very much about that time. But if I can just say one thing to you, I happened a couple of weeks ago to fly back from Vienna to London, and in the way of airline travel I had more time to contemplate than I would wish. And I was sitting in the airport and I looked round and I could see the work of the architects, the civil engineers in the airport. We got on the plane and the sort of engines revved up, and my thoughts went to the mechanical engineers and even more to the chartered engineers within the Royal Aeronautical Society, and I hoped that they'd done a good job, and we sailed happily down the runway and the aircraft flew very smoothly back to London. And my thoughts, as in the BCS very much these days, was on the subject of engineering. And it occurred to me that throughout the whole of that flight I had been conscious of the work of a great many different types of engineers. The only time I actually, as a travelling member of the public, saw any evidence of a computer was at the check-in. And there I have to say, there are some, almost universally, some quite abominable little displays with very poor quality lettering on them and so on. That was the only time we saw a computer, and yet we all know here that the whole of the airline industry depends on computers. The engineers who built that airport may well have used computer-aided design techniques. We are indeed a form of invisible engineering. I think the public has no idea, most of them, the complexity of the systems that we build. And the reason I believe that this collaboration with the museum is so important is because it is part of a process of showing members of the public that the best engineering that we produce does stand comparison with the great Victorian engineers and other great 20th century engineers in other disciplines. We write programs, you well know, of 1 million lines of code. I don't know what proportion of those we might regard as switching the logic of the software when it's running. But even if it were, I don't know, perhaps a mere few percent, we're talking of machines which might be considered as having the equivalent of tens of thousands of moving parts. And then people like my wife, not wishing to be sexist, but it's true, my wife expects to be able to buy word processing packages containing thousands of moving parts for a few £100. And it's probably right that we should be able to supply a mass market. But the thing that matters to the society today is that the public should understand and should respect the complexity of the work that you have all done, that our profession is doing. And it's because of the need to make public demonstrations of that and to interpret that to the public that we are so appreciative of the efforts of the museum in restoring these machines to working order. And I hope that as time goes on, that machines that we would today regard as modern will in time find a place in the museum, so that in 10, 20 and 30 years' time there will be a history of computing which new generations can come and look at. And it's for that reason that we're delighted with actually having a working Pegasus, a working, most of the time, 803, a slightly more crotchety machine perhaps, and why a working 401 is really going to be marvellous, because I think certainly I was told at one stage it probably wasn't restorable, and therefore it'll be a particular thrill to see that. It really is, I believe, crucial to our society as a whole that the work of engineers in our area is fully understood and appreciated and takes its place alongside the great engineering works from other disciplines. Thank you once again for this opportunity to meet. I know at a personal level that many here will be thrilled even to have that opportunity to come together, and to do so in these lovely surroundings is a great pleasure for us. Thank you very much indeed, Director, for the opportunity.
Ladies and gentlemen, the buffet will now be served. At convenient points there, I will, in my usual manner, organise you outside to stand in groups behind the drum, which is out there, the drum from the 401, in order to have your photograph taken on this occasion. Right? So I will call you forward. Thank you very much indeed, and please to help yourself to.
It's got, well, it's 35 years since 1947, but you have been for 3 years.
3 years, 3 years, and I
coincides with the cycle. And I am going round, separate from Ziegler, actually talking about the problem of professional accountability. And that is absolutely hard. I mean, there's a lot more one can say. Basically, the public comes to believe our propaganda of computers work. The simple reality is that in the second edition works, but by the grace of God, more than anything else.
Who are not accountable to sound and the other
Thank you very much. That wouldn't be much, that would be only about 5 hours. Thinking about the oil rigs. And the work that needed to advertise, we're doing on that in the treatment.
Were you operating commercially?
Oh yeah.